Okay, good Saturday afternoon. It's Saturday, May 22nd, 2021. This is part 10 of our history. I'm going to pick up with this. We're going to do a little bit of an important review. I've had a lot of questions come in about some of the videos I've done in relation to things that people have, in their own research, came across and want some answers to. So we're going to do a kind of a brief on things up until the 1900s and then go into the 1900s up to 1920. That brief is going to consist of looking over, which we're going to we'll just go right to it and get to it, kind of like a brief review we're going to do here real quick. And I understand too, I just want to say, I know a lot of people are going to say, so much stuff is repetitive. One thing I always say about the repetitive thing, and that, the constant of the same thing over and over, just understand this. I only care about the truth about what's in history and the facts that, as the facts present themselves, the unquestionable facts. And the thing with the facts and the truth is they don't change. That's why it's repetitive. You see, when I have to readdress something about things that we've already reviewed and kind of do a brief review again, you're going to see the same things again because the truth doesn't change. The truth doesn't change. The facts that support that truth doesn't change. So I understand on that part it's repetitive and it's somewhat boring. But understand if you follow along and don't think it's repetitive in a sense, you're going to find like it now, there's going to be small things of which people question, of which, I had to go and do some more due diligence and see how I could find what I knew online and then bring that. I had to search online so that when I do this I can find the evidence of things I know that I can show you for facts, because people want to see facts. They want to see something that supports it. So understand as well too, in the description, as you'll see, there's links to everything that we're going to be reviewing within what we're talking about, so that others can go and view that, and then from there take it into do their own due diligence in relation to the evidence and things we're going to discuss. But as we say in brief, our country was founded on the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is a very important document because this here document establishes us as an independent people. And pretty much the Declaration of Independence, I just want to say here so people understand this in brief so we get this into people's mind. It was not a letter of all come to America. It was not an all welcome to America. It was not an all inclusive in America. It was a Declaration of Independence that we told the entire world that we are establishing our nation by our terms, under our conditions, our morals, our values as a people. And if the world didn't agree, that's too bad. We didn't care. It was a declaration of separation from everybody in the world, and to form that of our own national origin, morals, values, and principles as a people. That's what the Declaration of Independence was all about. When you read the Declaration of Independence, it says it right here. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and assume among the powers of the earth the separate but equal stations to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind required that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So as you can see by, you go there and you read it, you can see that we are pretty much telling the whole world, we are separating from you. We don't agree with your way of governance. We don't agree with your authoritarian, your totalitarianism, and we don't agree with your monarchies, your kings, your demigods, and your superior rulers and elitist status, okay? We are one people who we consider ourselves all created equal, and we're going to form a country under our principles and values as that people. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. That Declaration of Independence stems off into the Revolutionary War, of which we all know, in 1777, where we fought for our independence. Now, another important thing that I have included here, because it's going to play a role in what we're going into the 1900s as well, is the Federalist Paper number 10. Today, we hear a lot on the news, we see a lot, we hear it especially from the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party ignorant members of the Democratic Party. I'll tell you, I call them Dinos because a lot of them, in truth, they're just ignorant Americans that don't even understand the truth of the Democratic Party, who the Democratic Party are, or what they represent. They're just ignorant, blind fools who go along with what they're told and never do the due diligence work to figure out exactly what it is they're a part of and representing. And it's just total ignorance. But you'll hear these people, like the news people on the news, most of the media outlets right now, and most of the politicians as well, including Republicans and Democrats, because ignorance is abundance within our country right now among the educated paper-brained idiots that are running our country. And you'll hear them say, our democracy, our state of democratic state, our democracy. And the sad part is we are not a democracy. And we need to start recognizing as American people the true founding principles. And we also have to understand that the ideology of where we see foreign nations as we progress forward into the 1900s, we have to review this, because in the start of the 1900s we have World War I, which we're going to indulge into this with these other nations. Like today you have what's known as the Republic of Iran. Now understand, the Republic of Iran is a name that reflects when it was actually a true, real republic. You see, in 1978, Iran was a true republic, a constitutional republic like the United States. It had a constitution near verbatim to the United States, and they were considered to be a free people just like the American people. And we were allies then with Iran. But then they got overthrown by the Muslims. But you see, these foreign totalitarian Islamic Muslims, as well as other foreign totalitarian nations like the communist China, what have you, when they overthrow something and it has a tie to something they're trying to associate with that will confound the posterity, the future generations, they keep the name. So they kept the name Republic of Iran to make it appear as though it's still a republic, when in truth it's not. It's a banana republic. It's a fallacy. And this is something we have to understand. We cannot allow ourselves to fall into this misrepresentation of who we are as the American people. And the Federalist Paper number 10 by James Madison, really, you had the Federalist Papers were written by John Jay, James Madison, Hamilton, and as well, much of the Federalist Papers that were contributed, many of the other founders contributed in the research and development that resulted in what the papers written by John Jay, James Madison, and Hamilton were, including Benjamin Franklin, and they all took part in aiding in the history, and that's what the Federalist Papers were. They were kind of like an essay of a review of world governments that were established. Now, the Federalist Paper number 10 is very important because in this paper, it's spoken very clearly about what a republic is and what a democracy is, and the difference between them, and that's very important. So we're gonna see if we can find here. Okay. In a fascist consist of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. When a majority is included in the fascist, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passions or interests both the public and rights of their citizens. To secure the public good and private rights against danger of such fascists, and at the same time preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, it is then the great objective to which our inquiries are directed. Let me add that it is the great discernment by which this form of government can be rescued from the, I can't say that word, under which it has so long labored, and be recommended to the esteem and adaptation of mankind. By what means is this objective attainable? Evident by one of two only. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in the majority of that at the time must be prevented, or the majority having such coexistent passion or interest must be rendered by the number and local situation unable to concert to carry into effect schemes of oppression. Now understand, I'll leave this, you got to link this, you can go read all that he's speaking of here, and how he explains in this whole thing as you read this, how a republic and a democracy are different, and how the republic is what we're establishing. And to understand, a republic idea and concept goes back to ancient Greece, and that's an ideology, and then even like we see it with the Magna Carta, back, even back with that far there, going back after even ancient Greece. And, we see the term, and what it is it represents a government that's established by the people. But the American establishment of our government, under our Declaration of Independence, is a new form of which nowhere in world history do we ever see such a form of government exist. Because we totally take away from the government, and forming by our government, any authoritarian position. We become a government of the people, for the people, by the people. And the government is there by our consent. This is another, an important thing when we look at the Declaration of Independence. We make this very clear. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That this is back to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now pay attention to what it says here. It says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now that's a very important statement that you understand in the founding document of our nation, in our declaring our independence as a self-governing people. Our government is there by our consent. Their authority is given them by our consent, the people. They are not the authoritarian powers over us as what they act like today, and mostly within the Democratic Party. And sadly, the Republican Party is failing because it's not truly a Republican Party anymore of what the founding principles of republicanism was in this country. The Republican Party today represents, for the majority, no offense, but a bunch of coward, worthless, weak, uneducated, unaware, ignorant, goddamn ass-sitter fools. That's what it represents. I'm sorry. That's just the way I feel about it. I'm disgusted with today's modern-day Republican Party. But as we move forward here, we're just going to keep going here. The Constitution of the United States, as we know, we have our Constitution, which was ratified 1787. We have the Constitution by 1789. It was ratified, actually. And then we also have the Bill of Rights that had to follow this in 1791. Mostly here considered and had to be amended into the amendments to the Constitution, but with Thomas Jefferson, because we kind of forgot that in the first drafting of it. Luckily, we caught this. But then the Bill of Rights was implemented. And then these things lay down the foundation for what our country is built upon. Now, okay, now, some of the things that we're going to go into the 19th century here, heading into it. We're facing a situation where when we're coming into the 1900s, it's going to representation of that of the First World War. Now, it's my understanding, like I say, many people who know me know I really didn't start to attend school till I was like near 13 years old. The majority of all that I know in relation to history, U.S. history, world history, was self-educated before that point there by my own research, due diligence, and study in libraries as a kid. And then even when going to school, when I did attend school for 5 years, going up to graduate grade high school, the history they taught to me was totally lies, and I had a lot of issues with the history teachers during those years with that. But you know what? If you can prove the facts and truth of what you know of history, well, you know, the history, I don't think history teachers intended to lie. It's what they learned. It's what they were taught in the so-called wizard of colleges that give out these paper brains to these people that indoctrinate them to believe these fabricated, pretty much that's what it is. It's indoctrinated lies. It's all propaganda to try and twist history. And that's what history is, his story. Each person telling, like, this is my story of history. But in truth, with me, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm totally impartial to it, that the only thing I care about is the facts. And that's what I try to do in these videos, and I'll present here, like, the facts. Now, when we understand what we're doing in America, understand, and the reason why we're doing a recap, even in the founding of America, there was still this long waging war going on around the world for world dominance. That war can be tracked with a 13,000-year written record of history of humanity that's been ongoing, where you have these totalitarian, elitist, scumbag rulers who want to dominate and rule the world, and they're always in pursuit of causing havoc and division and upset among humanity to cause wars where they can further take control or enslave people. And this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. Upon the rise of America, the world was still in this very same state. Now, the things we're going to look at is something that I want to consider here. The Europeans during the First Crusades in the late 12th century. Okay, when we look at what happens here, this is the Christian Crusades, goes on with the Muslim wars, where the Muslims are pretty much waging their jihad for world domination around the world, trying to force everyone, is like what they still do to this day, trying to force people to convert under their Islamic rule. And we see this starting with the Europeans during the First Crusades, and like it says here, the 12th century. Now, when we look at the territories in these maps, this is what I'm trying to get at. When you look at this map right here, you see this area, right? And as we progress forward, you're going to see this here is the early Crusades map. You see it? And you have here the Holy Roman, the Empire, the Selenites of Rome, you know, in these areas here, dominions of Russia, Poland, you see right here, England right here, you see? The Byzantine Empire right here, that's here, you got going on. Okay, the Crusader states down over in this area here. Okay, and what I'm trying to point out here is as we move forward here, you see here too is like the Barbary states. The Barbary states are important to understand because this represents what eventually becomes in World War I in the beginning of the 1900s, the Ottoman Empire. Which I believe, yeah, you can see it right here, right? Yep, okay. So, you know, the Ottoman Empire is right there. So you see that, right? And this is what I'm saying. There's a Barbary coast. Now, these things are important because as we progress forward, a little bit of touch on history. Now, right here, you have, this is where it's happening, right here, along this area. If you see my mouse circling that area right there, like up here is Austria. It's a little highlighted so we have a point to go by for reference. Okay, and then down here is where you're going to have that Barbary, which is considered today the Islamic coast of the Islamic states. Saudi Arabia over here, you got Yemen, you got Iran right here, Iraq, Jordan, Syria. You see this all over in here? This is where all this point here. Now, as we go forward here, you can see here, this is the Barbary State Empire, total war. Okay, and then this right here, if you were to overlay it, what we're just looking at, it's the same area. And now, the thing, my point is here, here's one that shows an evolution as you go down through time. Territorial evolution of the Ottoman Empire. So as you see this right here, it goes from 1300, 1359, 1389, 1441. So it's showing the progression of the expansion of the Islamic Caliphate, of their Islamic rule by force conversion and war, how they expand their area. And they get to the point up, like I said, when we get here, we start to get up 1718, and it goes up, you know, and then right here by 1739, this is what's consistent of what is then the Ottoman Empire, but at that time was known as the Barbary Coast. And this is important, like I say, you understand. We had our first war as an independent nation after claiming our Declaration of Independence, establishing our Constitution. In America, we had the enemies within, which was known as the British Loyalists. They were the Tories. Now, we also had enemies that were the Barbary pirates, which is the Islamic Muslims. The Barbary, they name these things by name, like the Barbary and all that. They don't want to distinguish who these people are. And the Barbary are of the Ottoman Islamic empires. That's who they are, the Muslims. And we had our first war with George Washington, Thomas Jefferson actually, against the Barbary Muslims back in, like right here. You can see I'll have this up here, and I'll include links to this right here. This is from the First War of 1801. Now, as we progress forward, this is something I want to point out what George Washington said, so we understand, because I've said this before. America has, since the very founding of our nation, banned the Islamic Muslims from coming to our country because of our understanding of who they are and their totalitarian form of foreign government, and how they are the enemies of America, and why they are the enemies of America. Not so much by the Declaration of America itself, but by the declaration of themselves. They declared us the enemies. But George Washington, I just want to put, would be, he states here, I would be understood to mean, I cannot avoid reflecting the pleasures on the probable influence of the commerce may hereafter have on human manners and society in general. But I'm just going to get to the point here in yellow where it says, he's speaking of here about the Barbary Coast with the Islamic Muslims. They at this time threatened us with what's called the jizya tax, and they wanted to impose, like, extort us. That's where non-Muslim nations have to pay to exist. Otherwise, if you don't pay, they will come and they will wage war on you and kill you. Because that's their thing. They're a totalitarian regime that pursues world domination and control. George Washington, in relation to understanding the Islamic Muslims and seeing what he was dealing with in them, he addresses, where's it at now? It just kind of like disappeared on me. I wanted to finally, you know what, I'm going to have to search here. There it is right down here, okay. So here George Washington is speaking with somebody from there, and he says, but to let me ask you, Mr. Marcuse, in such an enlightened, and let me highlight this also so you can see it. See it right there? Okay, such an enlightened and such a liberal age, how is it possible the great maritime powers of Europe should submit to pay an annual tribute to the little particle states of Barbary? Would to the heavens we had a navy able to reform those enemies to mankind or crush them into non-existence. This was Washington's goal, but we were a newly established nation at the time, and we really at this time couldn't afford to go to war. We just got done with the War of Independence. We didn't really have a navy. We had a very depleted military ground force at this time as well. But George Washington's view of what should be done with the Muslims was, as he stated here, he declared them the enemies of mankind, and that if we had the ability, we should crush them into non-existence. This was our first founding president's view of the Barbary Muslims. Okay, the second war for the American independence, this was in 1812. This is another important thing I want to touch on real quick as we go forward to some briefs over the history that we've already reviewed in parts 1 through 9. Okay, but in the Second Barbary War, the question has come about, well, in relation to the Democrats. Now, I want to point out in the Loyalists, okay, because somebody had mentioned something. They sent this to me here. This is an article. It says, "Dear Sir," this is where somebody's asking history.net. Clearly, the people at history.net do not know American history. And this guy who answers these questions, really, this is what makes me angry. Now, me, if I don't know something about history, I'm going to tell you I don't know that. I don't know. If I'm not very well versed in facts about something in history, I'm going to say I don't know that. I don't know. But I will never tell you something, and I will never say something in history that could potentially mislead somebody to believe a thing about history where I don't have facts to support that thing. If I'm going to say something to you that's my opinion, I'm going to tell you, look, that's my opinion, and I will insist that you do the due diligence, get back to me, and let me know what you find. And then I'll do more due diligence as well. We'll find the truth by the facts, what we find. But this guy answers this question in a way that totally misleads the American posterity, public, and the person asking this question. We're going to take a look at this question. It says, "Dear Sir, this is not the first time I've asked you a question. I asked a question on Americans and the Philippines resistance, which you answered. And I would like to thank you for that. Now I have a second question, if that is allowed. Recently I have taken an interest in the Neapolitan Wars and the War of 1812. The question I have is, were there any underground loyalists during the War of 1812, as in loyalists stay behind or stragglers who did not flee to Canada or other parts of the empire after Americans won independence from Britain? If so, did any of these loyalists, if they existed in the United States, assist or join British forces? Thank you, Brandon." Now, he's referencing about the War of 1812. He wants to know, were the British loyalists here? Now, this is what the John Gutman, research director of World History Group, says to him. This is what, now this guy here is a perfect example of what I mean by a paper brain idiot, a dangerous paper brain idiot. Because you know what? This is supposed, like here, John Gutman, research director of World History Group. This guy makes himself sound very important. He probably has a bunch of paper brains from the Wizard of College that say he's a historian, but it's pretty clear he just bought the Kool-Aid of what he was told, or he's intentionally trying to hide the truth. Because he says here, as far as I know, all the loyalists had been killed or run out of the country decades before the War of 1812. A few had taken refuge in Canada may have fought in the war, but most Revolutionary War veterans were too old to be effective. Such was certainly the case on the American side, with the poor performance of Brig General William Hall in 1812 and Major Generals Wade Hampton and James Wilkinson in 1813. Sincerely. Okay, but now here's the problem I got with John Gutman. John Gutman obviously has just done maybe a brief research and found some Democratic propaganda that says this, because the Democrats have tried to disassociate from the British loyalists and the Federalists, because they don't want people to understand that that's who they are. You see, the ideology of who they are has never changed in this country. The Democrats are still the very same Democrats of the World Alliance with their world allies as they've always been. And the names keep changing. But the ideology and the foundational principle of the authoritarianism of their totalitarian platform never changes. They just change the names to keep trying to change and disassociate with that of where they're caught in being who they are. And this is what we're going to show you here. The Tories of 1812 decoding the language of the political insults in the early republic. Now, this is pretty important right here, because what you see here, right here, you see this right here. I'll include this link. You can go and you can read this. This is a very informative thing about the Tories during the time of the War of 1812. This talks all about the Tories and who they are, what they were doing, and how they did aid Britain in the War of 1812. I don't know where this guy, supposedly research director of World History Group, John Gutman, gets his information. But I mean, because the information's out there. I'll include this as a seed of fact. And I know this to be fact. We also have facts within the Federal Archives that make very clear that there was people who were in the southern regions of our nation at that time that were still very loyalist to Great Britain as the Tories And at this time, they were known as the Tory Federalists. Though they were still trying to mask who they were as the Tories. That's the thing. You see, the Tories were trying to hide who they were. They knew from the very beginning we were tar and feathering these people. They were the enemies within. As I said in prior videos, the Tories were the majority slaveholders in this country, and they also claimed the lands that they were managing prior for King George III as their own land. So they became the largest landowners of some of the wealthiest people in the newly developing nation of America. Because they had claimed all that land and the slaves as their property, which gave them great wealth and prestige and equity in the nation. And believe me, they didn't flee. Not all fled to Canada. Only a large majority went to Canada out of the northern districts like New York, New Jersey, and in the original founding colony areas. The Tories fled real quick up to Canada because they knew they'd be killed. They'd be tar and feathered. The true patriot Americans weren't going to have it. But the southern ones who held the plantations and were managing them as like governors appointed by King George III before the Revolution, they did not flee the country. They took the lands, they stayed, they fought against the American patriots from the back door as we fought Britain from the front door. So, and that's the facts. That's the facts that are undeniable by the evidence of facts within our history. I'll include this here so people can get a gist of that. We're going to go forward too and look at here. This was a thing that was done on the War of 1812, U.S. history, pre-colonial to 1865. Okay, this is an essay done on it right here. Republicans began to talk of war as a solution to these problems. Now understand, the War of 1812 comes about because Great Britain is still trying to dictate control as if they are still governing over the United States. So in truth, they hadn't yet given up. They just backed away from the war. And they still felt like they had the authority and power over the oceans, the land, the sea, and what have you. So at times where our ships were out there and they would capture a ship, they would take the Americans that were on that ship and force them into the British Navy to go and fight for them against their enemies and deal with their excursions or what they were doing, what have you. They would force them into and say that, well, you were a British citizen or you're a descendant of a British citizen, so you're a Brit. And that's the way it would be. And then they also embargoed things going on with the United States, interfered with our trade. We had the issue with, like I said, the first Barbary War was over tariffs being paid and things like that, of which Britain was still paying to them. And slave trade was still going on with the Barbaries. The United States of America, as we know by this point right here, was in 1809. I believe we abolished the importation of slaves. This aggravated incidents with the Muslims because the Tories in the southern area, the Tory Federalists at that time, in America, the predominant business providers for the Islamic Muslims, because they were the ones who were controlling the African slave trade, the Muslims. They were the ones who founded it way before America even existed. As I said in prior videos, it was the Islamic Muslims who founded the black African slave trade in 640 AD when they invaded North Africa way back then, like 1,200 years before America even existed. But anyway, right here in this publication, it says Republicans began to talk of a war as a solution to these problems, arguing that it was necessary to complete the war for independence. So understand, you see here, it was like a continuation of what we realize that from 1777 forward all the way now to 1812, it's still that sore thing of what Great Britain's still trying to end. We still got the issues going on with the enemies within the Tories, who are now the Federalist Tories, and they're still loyal to Great Britain, and they're still fighting us, and they're the ones resisting the abolishing of slavery in our country and just causing all kind of hell in this nation because they were the enemies within. But it states right here, the war would also represent another battle against the Loyalists, some 38,000 of whom have populated Upper Canada after the Revolutionary and sought to establish a counter to the radical experiment of the United States. So pretty much, as you can see here, like even the ones who fled to Canada, and the ones, and they pretty much dominate Canada still to this day. The Tories party is very strong in Canada. And like fools, we consider Canada, which still has a queen and a monarchy and what have you, is still tied to these long-established totalitarian regimes as though they're our ally. This is idiocy because, in truth, we have no world allies. We have certain world allies, but we have lost world allies as quick as we've gained them as we progress forward into our history coming into the 1900s. We're going to go into that. We're going to see how we gained and lost allies. Because starting with the World War I, of which we're going to start in 1900s, we're going to see where we gain. We start to gain our first ally, like the nation of Australia with the Aussies. And then as we progress forward, we're going to see how we lose these allies by our own inability to act as we should as an ally to these foreign nations who join us in our pursuit for liberty and freedom. But like I say here, just another quote, I'll include this here. You can see the loyalists it mentions. Okay, now, what we're talking about with the Federalists and the Republicans. Now, Jeffersonian Republicans were the Republican Party. It was founded by James Madison in 1789, actually, right around the time when the Constitution was being ratified. And that was because the Republican Party would be representative of that of the only form of government which the Constitution itself authorizes, which I didn't bring up. So I'm going to have to bring this up again. We're going to have to go to and find Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. I didn't bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up now, right here. So I have this now here, and I'll bring this back to where we are in the conversation. Right here, right here. Forward. Where are we at? Where are we at? Okay, so here we are, right here. Right here, we're through that part. There. Okay, so here we are, and then boom, right here. Okay, so this is where we're at. Okay, so now, Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. I'm going to read this to you. Section 4. The United States will guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. You understand it right there? As far as I just want to go. The rest, you can read the rest of Article 4. Section 4. The United States will guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. This is the only form of government that the United States Constitution, by that of the authority of us, we the people, have consented to for this nation to have. We do not consent to a democratic or a democracy state of government, a dictatorship, a monarchy, an elitist position, or authoritarian. We only agree to that of what we declare as our form of a self-governing republic, as we declare in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. This is the first time a government like ours in the world has ever been established. In our Constitution, Section 4, it only consents. Now, you can search the entire Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, and look for the word democratic or democracy. You won't find it. It does not exist anywhere in the Constitution. It's never mentioned, because we are not a democratic state. We are not a democracy. We are a republic. Again, you can go back and visit the Federalist Paper number 10, where we were speaking on this thing with James Madison. I think I had somewhere back. I don't know if we went over it. We passed it. Looks like we did. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so back to where we are now. I know I'm losing track here. I'm sorry if I'm throwing anybody off, but I'm just trying to make the point. So now we have the Jefferson Republicans right here. Now Jefferson, like I say too, you have this other fallacy that's being thrown around by Democratic propaganda. They mentioned the Democratic Republican Party, and they try to say that Jefferson was the founder of the Democratic. Look, in all honesty and truth, and I'll challenge any historian out there, and I've done this with many historians, including the idiots that they have in Wikipedia, and yet they don't have a thing they can say because they know what I'm saying is the truth. The term Democratic Republican Party was a term that was coined way, way later. Matter of fact, it was a term that first appears in Jefferson's biography book that was done in I believe it was in 1908 that book was written. It was a rewrite of his bio, and they mentioned the Democratic Republican Party then. This was during a time of where we're getting into the 1900s, where the Democrats try to propagate and rewrite history to include themselves in it as a Democratic Party and try to make themselves appear as though they're the founding party of our nation, of which in truth, no, they are the enemies. They've always been the enemies within, and they still are to this very day the very same enemies within they've always been. Not so much the voting public of the Democrats. They are just dinos, Democrat name only, ignorant fools that don't even know the history of the party they represent. They're just blind, ignorant fools that really are disgraceful humans because they don't even take the time to look into the truth of the matters we're talking about. What kind of disgraceful, ungrateful person are you to have such a blessed nation, and yet you represent that of the enemy's party in our nation that's been trying to destroy this nation since the founding of this nation? It's just disgraceful. But anyway, we're going to move forward here. So we have here Article 4, Section 4, which authorizes that right there. Now, the British strategy in Southern Indians War of 1812. This is another thing. Now, understand, when we're at 1812, the British loyalists, who are the Tories, now the Federalists at that time, they were trying to establish a Federalist political party, were also very strong allies with many of the Indians. The Indians, along with the Tories, were now breeding black African slaves here for slave trade, because slavery was banned to be imported. You could not import slaves no more. The constitutional federalist government of the United States of America had banned the importation of slavery. So the Indians now, and many free blacks as well who owned black slaves, were breeding their slaves to sell to the Tories. And so this is the British strategy. They had an alliance with the Indians and as well with the Tories, who were against us in the War of 1812. Okay, they were against us. These things here, I'll include links as well. Like I said, everything I'm showing you is going to be a link to. But we're going to go here forward, and we're going to look here, okay? Now, I want to show you, this is an 1804 campaign ad by Jefferson and Clinton when Thomas Jefferson was running for president. Now, it's very important that you read this thing. It says here, Republicans, turn out, and save your country from ruin. From an emperor, from a king, from an iron grasp of the British Tory fascists, an unprincipled bandito of British speculators, the hireling tools and mercenaries of Majesty King George III have thronged our city and diffused the poison of principles among us. Down with the Tories, down with the British fascists, before they have it in their power to enslave you and reduce your families to distress by heavy taxation. Republicans want no tribute liars. They want no ship ocean liars. They want no refuge kings for lords. They want no Varick to lord it over them. They want no Jones for senator who fought with the British against the Americans in the time of war. But they want in their place such men as Jefferson and Clinton. Now understand, what you're seeing here, right here, the Republicans. You see, Jefferson is a Republican. There is no Democratic Party at this time. There's no Democratic Republican Party at this time. That's a lie. That's a made-up term of modern time to try and make it look so they can inject Democrat back into history to try and make it look as though they existed at some point. Now, during this time here of this here 1804, you do have what would be the founding principles of the Democratic Party being established under the Federalist Party, which ties that, and that's what I'm trying to say. The Tories formed the Federalist Party in an attempt to hide themselves as the Tories. So now they're the Federalists. The Federalists eventually become the Democrats. Okay, and as we progress forward, we're going to see what happens about things here. This is the Federalist Party here. It was founded by Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was a Tory, in truth. He was a Tory. And he represented that of, in part with his, he opposed Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Jay within the Federalist letters because he was more in support of that of a Democratic kind of government. And he was the guy who, when we see the opposition of debate going against these things, where you see James Madison speaking against the Democratic Party in like the Federalist paper, number 10 I mentioned, you'll see that he is directing these things at Hamilton, who is trying to persuade to have favor for their Federalist Party because they, these are the Tories. And with time, it's true. With time, it's evident that the newer generations aren't exposed to what the realities of who the Tory were, and then now that they're the Federalists, and the Federalists, how they hide themselves. The Tories changed their political platform to being called the Federalists. This way here, the newer generations, when they would hear the horrors of who the enemies within of the Tories were, they wouldn't associate the Federalists with the Tories. But that's who they are. You see, they just changed the name. And as we progress forward, you're going to see and understand very clearly this is the practice that's been going on long-standing with them. Now, this is a little twig of history, people. I don't know. I would hope most are aware of it. I think they teach that in school, I hope. But Hamilton, the guy who was actually part of writing the Federalist Papers with John Jay and James Madison, which was contributed by all the Founding Fathers, he was shot to death and killed in a duel by Burr, who was with Thomas Jefferson. And, over disrespect and what have you. The story is kind of twisted up. In truth, this duel insisted more than insult to his family members. It insisted, and the truth of the matter is the things I'm talking about, it represented the aggression that still existed between the Tories and the Patriot Americans. At this time now, the Patriot Americans who would have been patriots, the colonists, are now called the Republicans of the Republic because the Republic was established in the Constitution on Article 4, Section 4. Hamilton is representation of that of the Federalists, the opposing party to the centralized constitutional government that's being formed by the people. They don't want that because they're the Tories. The Tory become the Federalists. This duel is that of a disrespect of pretty much enemies. The Republicans know that the Tories are their enemies. The Patriots know that the Tories are their enemies. Hamilton, in truth, is a Tory trying to mask himself, claiming to be a Federalist, a new name to just hide who he is His intentions to know he offends not only does he offend Burr's family, Burr's himself's character, but the character and the truth of the founding principles of our nation. In the duel, Hamilton gets killed by Burr, and thank God, because he's a Tory. It's what he deserved, in my opinion. But there's more to that to go in. But right here. Okay, now here's another thing I want. This is the Federalist, Anti-Federalist, the origin of the terms. Now, this is something, the origin of the terms. This is important. I found this because, I can remember reading in the Federal Archives when I was younger. There was a guy, his name Bob Clark. I remember this guy's name. His name was Bob Clark, and there was he was a part of a fella in the early stages of the FBI being established. It was right before Hoover time, and he wrote this thing on a study in relation to Woodrow Wilson and what have you. It was a long FBI report that I'm pretty sure it was Bob Clark. I'm pretty sure it was Bob Clark, and he had wrote, and I read this whole thing about the truth of how. And that's what I'm saying. This was this report by the federal, at the time it was called the Bureau of Investigations. It wasn't the FBI, it was the Bureau of Investigations. It hadn't yet become the FBI with Hoover. Like Hoover is established a Federal Bureau of Investigations, but it was just known as the Bureau of Investigations at that time. It was just newly being established. And he was one of the first guys to with the FBI, as we go forward, we're going to look into a little bit more. So let me not jump too ahead, but I just want to say here, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist, the origin of the terms. Now, the important thing I have highlighted here, which you can see in the gray right there, is this thing. While the terms Whig, Tory, Federalist are embraced by different American political factions as of various times, the terms Anti-Federalist never enjoyed such legitimacy. During the ratification debates, even those opposed to the Constitution resented being labeled Anti-Federalist. Instead, they argued that they were the real Federalists for trying to preserve, now this is very important to understand, trying to preserve the Confederation of States as it then existed. They insisted that those who claimed to be Federalists were actually creating a consolidated national government that would alienate the sovereignty of the individual states. Now, the reason why I have this right here is because, as you can see, their argument had some merits, but was hampered by the fact that the terms Federalist and Anti-Federalists were rooted in events prior to the drafting of the Constitution, according to Samuel Byron, himself as an Anti-Federalist. The terms grew up in New York and in the eastern states sometime before the calling of the Convention, to distinguish those who support strengthening the Confederation and those who preferred local and particular advantages. Federal men were those who supported the impost of the 1783, which would have placed the finances of the Confederation on a stable footing. Those who opposed it were anti-federal men, because many of those opposed the Constitution had also been opposed to earlier efforts to strengthen the Constitution, such as the impost. It was difficult for them to argue convincingly that they were the real Federalist. Okay, so like I'm saying right here, this points out the fact of what I'm saying. The Federalists try to state that they were like the founding principles, but because they hope. You see, and the thing that I'm saying is like, because we're looking at now like 1804, getting up to 1808, 1810, and the Democrats, same as the all world alliances with them, which are long established. When you take, for instance, I wanted to say, like, you look at something like the royal monarchies of Arabia. These are families that have been around for literally 6,000 years. Egyptian royal monarchies and the totalitarian rule of Egypt has been around for 10,000 years. When you look at China, you can find a history goes back with Buddhism all the way back like 11,000 years. So understand that the principles, values, and ideology of totalitarian superialism and authoritarianism sustain for generations and generations and into centuries. And they're long established. And the democratic platform of the Tories and the British Loyalists, now the Loyalists of the Great Britain and the monarchies of the kings of Great Britain as well extends for thousands of years. These things they just change names, they change political fascist titles, all to try and mask who they were when they're recognized as enemies in the past. And this is what we're saying, what I'm trying to say, and what you have to, when you really study world history, not just America, but world history and American history, you start to understand that the people who we have issues with, conflict with, who they're called at that time, as once the war comes to a cooling point where it ceases for a little bit of time, like there's a recess, those people who are now known enemies of America will change the name, change the whole order of government, change even the national name of the nation itself, and his whole ideology, and reclaim a whole new ideological political establishment, so that they disenfranchise from being known the enemies of America. They're still the same people. They still have the same intentions. They just changed the name to disassociate with what they were known as the enemies of America. And this is the way the world works. And this is the way these totalitarian regimes have been working for thousands of years. You can see this taking place back in ancient Babylon. This was how the great kings of Babylon were able to nearly get to the point, like with Nebuchadnezzar, where he ruled the entire world by using this manipulative practice of pitting people against each other, and then slowly, like, never associating himself with the enemies, always associating himself with his allies in a way where he would twist the enemies of his allies to take over his own allies. Then he would gain them as, I'm losing track here of what I'm going. But anyway, they assisted in those who claimed to be Federalists were actually creating a consolidated national government that would alienate the sovereignty of the individual state. My point of what I'm trying to make in this right here is that's very democratic, you see. This is what the Democrats today try and claim the Civil War was over, that they were trying to protect the sovereignty of state rights. So understand the principles and the foundation of the ideology between the Civil War and this time here with the Federalist Tories is still the same principle as what they are in the future when they become the Democrats, okay? And that's my point I'm trying to make. If you've been following my videos up to now, you should be fully aware that the Tories were the ones who evolved into the Federalists, and the Federalists evolved into the Democratic Party, who is the very same Democratic Party we have today. The Federalists opposed Madison's war. Now, this is the War of 1812 that it's speaking on. This is the Second Revolutionary War. And what we have going on with the Second Revolutionary War, what we were touching on, was Great Britain coming in again. They were trying to still hold an authoritarian position over the United States of America. And they were still trying to act as though they had authority over us, as a ruling authority, as like a foreign nation ruler over us. And, well, you know, we had the war party at the time was the Republicans. The Republicans wanted to go and make sure that they understood, no, you don't have authority over us. We were not going to deal with that. But the Tories, as we showed here, I already showed, they aided and assisted them in this war. At this time, shortly after we won the Second Revolutionary War, which, real quick, a little bit of trivia things for people to know, it was the Second Revolutionary War of 1812 was the war that our national anthem came out. It was written in a poem by, oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember his name right now. Well, you can look it up. It was the poem was that formed our national anthem came out of the Second Revolutionary War with the Star Spangled Banner, and it was an attorney guy who wrote the. And I just can't believe I can't remember this guy's name right now. I know who it is. It's just I'm just drawing a blank, like I have one of them moments. But anyway, so following the War of 1812, we go into the Second Barbary War of 1815. We're again fighting with the Muslims, and the second war with these Muslims. Okay, and then in this time here in this war, a little bit more research is done by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison to expand upon the knowledge of already what George Washington knew, that these were the enemies of mankind. Now, it says here in 1786, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams met with the Tripoli's ambassador to Great Britain to ask by what right this nation attacked American ships and enslaved American citizens, and why Muslims held so much hostility toward America, a nation with which they had no previous contact. The two future presidents reported that Ambassador Sadi Haji Abdul Raham Ajah had answered that Islam was founded, now listen to this because I'm going to tell you something. With Islam, it's an ancient totalitarian regime, and it still to this day follows that of the ancient founding order. They do not change a thing. They're not allowed to change a thing. They stand by it. They live by it. It's what they practice, what they preach, and what they're all about. And it has not changed since this time right here where these statements are being made. It's the very same. So it says here, Islam was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran that all nations, and this is by Thomas Jefferson, that all nations who would not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim, who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. So understand, as you can see here, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, in the War of 1812 now, the second, or 1815, the second Barbary War, as they call it, the Barbary War. And this was not a Barbary War, it was a Muslim war, because that's who the Muslims are. Again, as I said, as we go through and you see like the Tory, the Federalists, the names, the name changing, they do this to distract you from who you're dealing with. By calling them the Barbaries, we don't associate them with the Mohammedans of the Muslims from the first Barbary War. You understand what I'm saying? They changed the names. In the first Barbary War, in truth, when you look back, they were called the Mohammedans. Now they're called the Barbaries. So, it's just how it goes. The names are to mask who they are so they're not associated with the first prior recognized and known established enemies of the United States under George Washington. But we pretty much know these are the Mohammedans. They're the very same Muslim men and Muslim of Islam with the Muslims as they were during the first Barbary Wars. Nothing has changed. So we go forward here. The thing again, now we're looking at this map. Now I know this is important to understand. You're probably like, where are you going with this? My point of all this is the ties of all these things with the Revolutionary War with Great Britain, the first Barbary War of 1801, the second Revolutionary War of 1812, the second Barbary War in 1815, which we just took. When we look at the landmass of these people and these rulers of these worlds at that time and the progression of this, it's the same people. Understand that only the names change. And this happens all the way up until the 1900s. And as we're getting into where we're getting into now, which I have links to all this, Slovakia, right here, all these things, when you look, like here, the Czech Republic, okay, you're going to find these are all, you can find right here, like here, this is where I'm saying, all that we just looked over, what is now considered at that time the Barbary coast of the Islamic Muslims, and then when we get to the point of, with all this, when we get here, we look all the way back to the Christian Crusades. If you were to lay the map over, it's the same people. So understand, the wars with the Islamic Muslims, the Muslim Islam has been adapted as a totalitarian ideology of authoritarianism by that of the Arab and the Egyptians. So now, because they're just opportunists and they see that, okay, this works, so we'll adapt it, and that's what they'll do. And it's also to separate, because now you have, like they have the Sunni and the Shia, you have different sects now, where one always plays like an ally while the other's the declared enemy. And this is something that's been long established going on, like I say, since the time of the Christian Crusades. We see this even back at the time with the ancient of India. India itself had this situation going on with the Muslim wars, and several times where India itself had been massacred by the Muslims, by one believing one side was their ally while the other was the enemy, not realizing they were encamping and bringing in, allowing among them the very enemies. And as soon as the Muslims had the numbers, they're going to attack. And India had near fallen several times, and even now is still under threat right now of infiltration and overthrow by the Islamic Muslims with their constant jihad of invasion and going in and forced conversions and what have you. And the idiocy of clearly India even forgetting its own history, as Greece did many times, and subjecting itself is like what we, America, right now are doing as well, subjecting ourselves to our very known and long-established enemies. We're letting them right into our own country, and we're being totally ignorant to the reality of the danger it poses for us. But like I say, these highlighted areas right here, the Muslim world population, is throughout time, since the Muslim uprising, it remains the same. And then prior to Islam, it still remains the same of that of the alliances, of that of the totalitarian Babylonians, the Roman empires and what have you. These things all stay the same. It's just amazing. These are maps of the world, of the First World War, because now we're getting into it, 40 maps that explain World War I. And that's my point. History of the World War. Okay, this is the history of the First World. This was written in 1918 about World War I. I'll include links to this here so you can if you care to read about the history. I found all these online books about it. Some of them I've actually already read a long time ago. Some of them are newer books. I have quite a run here of World Crisis in different volumes of these. The World Crisis was all of World War I. Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4. I got all these online. So if you want to really indulge into the study of World War I. Now, right here, when we get up into 1879 now, because we're moving ahead. We're past the Civil War now, and that's what I want to say. So all these wars when we're talking about the Revolutionary War, the Barbary Wars, the War of 1812, the 1815 Barbary Second Muslim War, and then the Civil War. These all involved, if you've been watching my videos, the same people. Now, with the Democrats here in America, that organization is founded out of the British Tories, who in the 1812 era, from 1810 to 1812, formed the Federalist Tories, and then from there, once they were recognized again as the enemies, in 1828, they formed the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party got exposed as the enemies of the United States of America in the 1861 Civil War, of which we won by 1865, but the Democratic Party was revived through, if you watch the history, my history channels, you remember back how they killed Abraham Lincoln, and they used terrorism to maintain their situation and position of power, to regain a political, because they used the Democratic Party was able to give them a position to take up House and Congress seats, because posterity had forgot who the Democrats were. And that's what I'm saying. When the Democrats formed in 1828, it was the Federalists, out of the Federalists, failed Federalists of Hamilton. And it was founded off of by Andrew Johnson, not Andrew Johnson, Andrew Jackson. He was the Democratic founding party who converted the Federalist Tories into the Democrats. The Federalist Tories were formed out of that of the British Tory loyalists. Just so you understand the progression how it goes. Like I said, they just changed the name to try and mask who they really are. And it was pretty clear and evident when you look at the progression of this going forward. And the same here. Now, we're looking at here, this is called the Rider Wars. So in the Rider Wars of 1879, this is the thing that we missed on, so we're just doing a review on it. I want to include that in there so you get it. Creating North Carolina's Populace. This is another good thing I found that it was from 1900, 1960. Being we're going into the 1900s, you can do a little catch up. Creating North Carolina Populace right here. This is mentioning about with the red shirts, the Democratic Red Shirt Committee. Now, this was an organization that, as we get up into this time here, where we're going into the 1900s, this organization was how the Democrats, after the Civil War, were able to get back into politics in our nation. They had organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, the Red Shirts, which were terrorist organizations that would literally murder, burn down homes of Republicans, terrorize the now free black Americans in their communities, and just wage terrorist attacks all around and instill nothing but fear and terrorism on people. And they also, at this point here, where we're talking about in 1898, it's an area going up into the 1880s to 1898 area, we have that they also formed what was known as the Knights Labor Union, which was the unions that were formed by the Ku Klux Klan, where they were able to dominate the booming industries that were developing and the economical booms that were taking place with the Industrial Revolution taking place in America. And if you watch my history videos prior, these things are all discussed. I'm not going to go into heavy detail into it now, but I just wanted to mention about the Red Shirts. The Red Shirts were how they were able to now gain a political position again, because they would terrorize people to vote. And people who were going to vote Republican, they would terrorize them to vote Democrat. With the unions, they would have, if they had union jobs, they wanted to keep their job, they had to vote Democrat. So these are the ways that they were able to manipulate this. So we see now, after they killed Abraham Lincoln, we would get to James A. Garfield. Garfield was a president who was a Republican. He's the second president to be assassinated in relation to this of, like I said, the Red Jackets, the Ku Klux Klan, the terrorist organization of the Democrats. This is how they deal with things. The Garfield assassination altered American history, but is woefully forgotten today. Nobody, like I say, nobody even ties together the reality of the Democrats' involvement with these assassinations in the political play at that time. And this is where we get to see it. Chester Arthur was who took position after they killed James Garfield. Then, if you notice, after him is the first Democrat since the time of the Civil War, Grover Cleveland. Now, there's some attributes to understand, because, people see these things, they don't think about what was really going on at that time. Let me tell you something. During the time coming up to Grover Cleveland, the nation right here, as you can see, they killed Garfield, right? They were terrorizing with the Red Jackets, the Ku Klux Klan, literally burning, murdering, lynching, and hanging people all over the country. White Republicans, black, the now free black Americans, hanging, terrorizing their communities like crazy. The Democrats are just a treasonous, no good, evil, disgusting organization of terrorism is what it is. Now, to get Grover Cleveland in, they used and pulled all tricks out of the hat to what they were doing. They had the Knights Labor Union, now well established in the northern factory developing areas like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and they had large populations of these people now under the control within union jobs. And pretty much it was, if you want to keep your union job, you had to vote Democrat, and you had to show proof that you voted Democrat. So, and if you didn't vote and you didn't comply with these things, it wouldn't be long till after you would lose your job, and you know that. So people were not voting loyalty to nation or principles and values of America. They were just all about like they are today. Many Republicans as well as Democrats are just selfish, ignorant, ungrateful people who just care about themselves, and they would give into it to keep their union job and not have to be in fear of losing their union job. They voted Democrat, and this was eventually how you got Grover Cleveland. It was all corrupt and forced situations by terroristic acts of the Democratic Party and pretty much corruptive actions taken within the elections. And this is so self-evident and undeniable. When we see here in the 1884 things here, this is a thing that's I want to just touch on here. Oh, the Ku Klux Klan, 1884. This is where we're talking about the time where we're coming into the election, 1884, of Grover Cleveland. Because, the Democrats like to try and make it, and historians try to lead along to believe it, just like we see with the previous historian who's an idiot. Today, the Democrats know what they're doing. They try to say it during this time the Ku Klux Klan was dissolved, it didn't exist. But I'm showing you evidence of fact right here that exists. This right here is its origin, growth, and disbandment. Okay, and this book was written in 1884. This is a book all about the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, and right here, the author Cap John C. Lester, and we're in 1884, and the booklet was written resident in Pulaski, Tennessee, where the first den of the Klan was founded. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say. So understand, I just want you to know, the Klan never disbanded, and as we progress forward into the 1900s, it's going to be very, very clear that they were just what they've always been, a secret terrorist society hiding underneath. And what they had now out in the front they were using mostly was known as the red shirts. Okay, and the red shirts by the Ku Klux Klan were who were terrorizing people at the voting polls. And this is how Grover Cleveland got elected. Now, I'm going to show you something that happens. Now, if you look here, you see Grover Cleveland, first Democrat since the Civil War, was elected in 1884. To give you an example of how bad the terrorism was by the Democrats at this time, the terrorism they were waging on the nation of America and the American people. We go to the next clip here, which shows lynching by year and race. Now, in 1884 was the highest year of lynching of white Americans by the Democrats and the Ku Klux Klan in their red jackets and their red shirts, because 160 whites were lynched by them. These were white Republicans who supported the now free black Americans. And during this time, you had the revolutionary boom going on with the economical revolution taking place in America. Many of the blacks were working and getting good jobs, and they were good labor force, and people liked them. But Republicans supported that unification of freedom and liberty for all. The Democrats didn't like that. And if you were a white Republican in 1884, once the Democrats got presidential control, well, as you can see by the spike right here, it was the highest year ever of white Republican or white American lynchings by the Democrats, 160 versus only 51 blacks being hung that year. And this was upon the election of Grover Cleveland, the first Democrat since the Civil War. So I say the evidence is clear to what's going on here. As we progress forward now, Grover Cleveland loses the second election to Benjamin Harrison, gets the third election back in. He gets his second term in 1892. So, where am I jumping ahead here? Right here, okay. So now, when we look here, we see Grover Cleveland again. Then he loses to William McKinley. Then we get to see again the terroristic acts and the ongoing waging of terrorism here. Because we got coming up, I don't know why this is out of place right here. I got the gold standard, but we're here. We come to this, the assassination of President William McKinley. McKinley was right after the second term of Grover Cleveland. And then it doesn't even stop there. We see that Roosevelt was the next guy to take after William McKinley, because Roosevelt was the vice president. He took in. And then we find out, the FBI was founded in 1908. I'm kind of getting way out of here. I don't know how I got things out of line here for years. The gold standard again, we're out of line here. I put these things in. But with Teddy Roosevelt right here is another thing people don't even remember. So, like I said, we had the acts here where they killed now William McKinley. Then you have Theodore Roosevelt. He gets in, who's known as Teddy Roosevelt. They go and they try to kill Teddy Roosevelt as well. So understand, like I say, this is just trying to, then we have William Henry Taft, and then we get into the FBI being founded. This is where we're at now. I got things kind of mixed up and going along here. The gold standard being founded, whatever. These are some of the trivial events that took place during the coming into the 1900s. So pretty much the review is ending now. We're going to break into the 1900s and start looking at some of the things that evolved. One of the things was the founding of the FBI is very important in 1908. The Bureau of Investigations was an organization that was founded by the Republicans because we recognized all the things I'm talking about right now. We've seen the terroristic acts of the red shirts by the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party's Ku Klux Klan, the terrorist acts, the murdering that they were doing, the killing and the lynching of both white Republicans and black Republicans, because in that time all black Americans were Republicans because they understood who the Republicans were and who the Democrats were, and it would take generations, a couple more generations, before they would forget. And obviously, with time does erode, and ignorance is a bliss, right? So, but we see the FBI was founded in a way to try and find corruption and resolve, because, I mean, like I say, we had 2 presidents killed, like right there, and then we had a 3rd attempt on the vice president, Teddy Roosevelt. Within a matter of a span of like not even a decade, they tried to kill 3 presidents of Republicans. The Democrats were out of control, not to mention as well, like I said, with the red shirts, they were going around terrorizing people at the voting polls, and we're going to continue on with these things as we talk about this. But this is just trivia. The gold standard was established in the 1900s. The Democrats stood against the gold standard, just so you're aware. Right here, the thing about that, and then William Henry Taft, okay. Hoover, we know, okay. Brief history. I'm trying to unlock, okay. Red shirt violence, okay. Now, this is in the 1900s. This is coming into the 1900s. What we're talking here is when we got Grover Cleveland, the first president since the Civil War. William McKinley gets in, he gets killed. Theodore Roosevelt takes over, they attempt to assassinate him. William Howard Taft is in, and now we're approaching the 1900s. So, and what we're talking about here, when we get to this point now here, is right here, the red shirt violence. Election fraud and the demise of the Populist Party in North Carolina's 3rd Congressional District in the 1900s. Now, like I say, when we look at today, the issues we're facing right now with election fraud, corruption, and what's taking place right now with the Democratic Party across our country in local elections and state elections, we know the corruption right now is not only with the presidential, it's nationwide. But I'm saying these are long, well established. The Democrats have always been corrupt, all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. The Democrats have been corrupt. Since the founding of this country, to be honest with you. And they always win their positions by what they're doing with terroristic threats, murder, corruption, stealing the elections, you name it. These people have been scrupulous in their acts throughout the history of our country. And the evidence that supports this is unclear. The red shirts were a violent organization of the Democrats that stood outside voting polls and threatened people that if you didn't vote Democrat, you were going to have problems. Usually, if you didn't vote or you didn't do what they said, you would have problems. The Klan would come, they would burn down your home, murder your wife, your kids, hang you, lynch you, whatever. It was very horrible what the Democrats did. They never stopped. They just never stopped, to be honest with you. It keeps going. And as we progress forward, we're going to see here that with the red shirts and the influence they have with the terrorism at the time, and then to the hardship they were causing with the economical effects of the labor union that they had with the Knights Labor Union, which was formed by the Ku Klux Klan, we see the point to now where they get Woodrow Wilson in a corrupt election elected as well. This election was very questionable, as we see the avoiding post-election chaos, Wilson versus Hughes, 1916. The presidential election that Harold got wrong. People were so sure Hugh was going to win, and he had the major of the nation's support because of what I'm talking about. Many people understood the terroristic threats, the red shirts, the Ku Klux Klan, the horror going. Nobody really wanted the Democrats. The only way the Democrats could win it is the way they did it with Woodrow Wilson. They just did the same thing what they recently done with Donald Trump. They just took it. They just took it, and nobody did nothing about it because there was nothing you could do. They'll kill you. they'll kill you. And pretty much the Republicans, this is where we start to enter the real coward state of Republicans. They just give in to this thing. And the majority, like I say, of Republicans in this country at this time here are mostly the businessmen, the entrepreneurial-minded men, and their money is their mind is focused on their money and only themselves. They don't care. They really don't care. It's disgraceful how people with such blessings, they want all the blessings, they want all the good that life gives you in this free constitutional great nation of the United States of America, but they don't want to stand up and fight for it. They don't want to maintain it. They don't want to secure it. They don't want to preserve it. They just want the blessings of it, and they don't give a damn what happens to anybody as long as it's not happening to them. Ignorantly not realizing that eventually it's coming for you. It's coming for everybody. If it continues and eventually that of the very protective nature of the ideology of Americanism fails, everybody's going to be subject to the hell of these totalitarian regimes and that of the democratic authoritarian monarchies that are out there like what we see in this world today, still existing. As we go here now and we look forward, the election was corrupted for Woodrow Wilson to get into his position. Like here I have stories on it. We'll put this in. This is Berkeley, California. The Florida standoff is an unusual presidential election, but not unprecedented. This goes back to mention about, but Times is not talking about campaign 2000, but the presidential election of 1916 between President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, and the Republican challenger Charles Evans Hughes. There were allegations of election fraud, claims that ballots were tossed out because it appeared some votes had cast their ballots twice, and demands for a recount. These things, like I say, were long-standing with the Democrats. The Republicans protested, whatever, but when it came down to it, what the Democrats would do is just simply threaten to kill you. Burn down your house, kill your wife, kill your kids, terrorize your neighborhood, and then people would just shut up and let it go. They would stop pushing the issue. And that's exactly what Republicans did. Now, so Woodrow Wilson gets in, and we have The Birth of a Nation revived the Ku Klux Klan in America. The Birth of a Nation was one of the first silent movies made. It was a movie about how great the Democratic Party's Ku Klux Klan is. Woodrow Wilson is now the second greatest mistake America has made since Andrew Johnson. Woodrow Wilson, as president, has ties to members of the Klan that go back for near a century. His family, the Wilson family, of who Wilson's from himself, has ties to the racism of the Democrats that are deeply rooted all the way back to the founding, all the time of the Tories. Okay, and these are elitist, snobbish people who maintained their wealth from the time of the Tories forward with their large plantations that they claimed onto themselves from the kings of Great Britain following the Revolutionary War. Their wealth was well established. The birth of the quotation Woodrow Wilson and the like, writing history with lightning. And his watching The Birth of a Nation, the movie on the Ku Klux Klan, that's what he said. It is a quote from his. It's like writing history with lightning. Right here's another quote from Woodrow Wilson that he said. This is the President of the United States in 1908. Okay, the white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a valuable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. Woodrow Wilson. You see, so he admired the Ku Klux Klan. He was very supportive of racism. This guy was a Democrat, 100% true Democrat. He imposed the Jim Crow laws, and then he allowed the Ku Klux Klan to be able to go onto a nationwide onslaught of black Americans and white Republicans. Pretty much, and there was nothing you could do because of World War I, of which we're going to get into as we move forward. Another thing that most people aren't aware of, prior to Woodrow Wilson, there was no Confederate monuments in this country. Woodrow Wilson was such a proud Democratic Ku Klux Klan member that he wanted to revive that history of his origin. Now, you know, at this time they're saying, the Democrats are trying to tell you that they had nothing to do with the Klan, they were nothing about racism and that. But yet, when you look at what their president and on their long-standing founding principles of the Klan with the red shirts, the Ku Klux Klan, and now what Woodrow Wilson does here is just astonishing that any idiot could deny the facts is what the facts make clear. The National Park Service was established by Woodrow Wilson in 1908. So here I have the United States Capitals. This right here is a page that's by Liberal Wikipedia, a list of Confederate monuments and memorials. Down here where we're at right here shows the dates of when the federal Confederate monuments started to go up. And as you notice right here, the first ones to go up start in 1916 with Woodrow Wilson. 1917 right through 1922. These things were all during Democratic administrations, 1925, 1927. These were all the federal were put up by Democrats. Democrats were the ones who started putting up their proud representation of who they were from the Confederate Civil War. Because the Confederates were the Democrats. Woodrow Wilson was the man who started it back in when he became president. He's the first one. And like I say, when you look at the dates on these, you realize it didn't start with these monuments until Woodrow Wilson. Prior to that, everyone knew the Confederates were the enemies within. They knew that they were the Democratic Tories, and prior to being the Democratic Tories, they were the Federalist Tories. Prior to that, they were the Tories. I mean, you know, the mistakes were made kind of like Greece made multiple mistakes and fell multiple times in dealing with their enemies and forgetting who their enemies were. We've seen that happen with Greece and Babylon, and the Muslims as well. The Muslims have been doing this now for 1,400 years. And people keep falling for the same scam. That's why they say history is very important, because if you don't know it, you repeat it. Okay, now as we move forward here, we see too the Red Summer. This is all during Woodrow Wilson. Red Summer was the onslaught on Americans. Woodrow Wilson and the repression of free speech. Now, this was another thing too that we'll talk about. When you wonder how the Klan was able to do what they did, going around literally, like here, let's just take a look. The Tulsa Race Massacre, the Slocum Massacre in Texas, the Houston riots, Rosewood Massacre, all these things that were thousands of black Americans being disenfranchised and white Republicans being murdered, slaughtered right here by the Democrats, Ku Klux Klan Red Jackets, going and pretty much literally burning down entire cities across this country, killing thousands of people within the communities, and terrorizing people. And you know what? You wouldn't see it on the news. You wouldn't see it in the newspapers. You wouldn't hear about nothing of it. You know why? Because the Sedition Act of 1918 by Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson enacted the Sedition Act as a way to suppress the First Amendment, to stop the press. Now, you weren't allowed to speak negatively about anything unless approved by the government under him. So if you were to say, hey, you know, they're burning down Tulsa and they're hanging blacks and they're hanging white Republicans, and he would say, no, that's it, don't write about it, don't. And if you did, you got 10 years in prison. So he used the Sedition Act to cover up the onslaught of America with Democratic Party terrorism that was waging now for going on since the country was founded. But now they were able to actually just like afflict a horror on society with this evil president of this evil Democrat at the time, like unprecedented in history. It was like the Civil War all over again. The only thing, there was nobody defending the black American at this time, because and the white Republicans who were trying to defend him were as helpless as they were. They had no ability of fighting them off. It was just a horrible, horrible time, because this guy used all resources of the government power to oppress the nation under that of democratic authority and powers and rules. Luckily, as time would progress, eventually, well, actually, there is no luck in it. I mean, it was horrible what took place. It just reached a point where, he finally had gotten elected out. He ran his 2 terms, and they tried. They were gonna, but you know what? The Republicans at this time with Calvin Coolidge coming up, Calvin Coolidge died, complications, whatever. And then, I'm not Calvin Coolidge, Harding died, and then we had Calvin Coolidge. And then Calvin Coolidge was reelected, and then he was until 1924 with Charles Dole as the vice president. We had Herbert Hoover, was a Republican, Charles Curtis. Then we get up to the next Democrat would be in 1932. That would be Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, during these times here with these Republicans was an attempt to, because this is where we are now, we're in the onslaught of the time of Woodrow Wilson. I don't know if I'm spending enough time on, like I say, at this time here, Woodrow Wilson showed the birth of a nation, the Ku Klux Klan movie in the White House, revives the Ku Klux Klan across the country, and then lets them go on an entire Civil War basis battle against white Republicans and black free Americans, onslaughts across the nation. Like I say, if you look up Red Summers, the Houston riots in 1917, 1910 Texas Slocum massacres in Texas, The Tulsa race riots that took place in 1921. I mean, this went on for like a decade, over a decade, with the Democrats' this onslaught on the black American and white Republicans, and pretty much the Republicans, because at that time all blacks were Republicans and true Americans were Republicans. The Democrats were then, as they always had been, the enemies within, and still are to this day. And this is the things that we have to consider. I just wanted to do this review up to this point here. I don't know if I did this video proper, because I had, like I say, I had a lot of people asking questions and things. That's why I had to do the review. I kind of ran a review into the first. So I think maybe we might do a more, the next video we're going to go into might start again from 1900 and then just leave out a review and just really touch on the principal basis of what our nation was facing 1900 under Woodrow Wilson. Or I don't know, maybe I feel I covered it enough in this, because we've had other videos and I've talked about these things. And I think we need to progress forward because I want to get the history out there. And, you know, it's kind of hard to do these things. It's hard to do it with so much stuff that has to be covered. And it's also hard in the sense that, too, because I'm off the topic right now. I'm just trying to talk to everybody on this. And that's what I'm saying. That concludes pretty much what I want to say about the history going into Woodrow Wilson. So now we're up and facing into the 1920s, heading we're going to cover 1920s up to 1930s in the next video. But the thing of what I'm saying is it's very hard because as we go through this history, and the thing, like I say, there's so much history that has to be considered. And when you're watching the first video and then you're coming up to this point, the names keep changing. And this is what people have to understand. The names keep changing. But as I was showing prior in these maps, and I'll look right here again, where we can look at the map here. Let me find it. Here we go. When you look at these maps, this is a map goes all the way back to the Crusades. When you look at this map and then you look at the map of the war, of the Revolutionary War with Great Britain, you find that that map right there still represents the same to the totalitarian ideology of the monarchies that existed during the time of the Christian Crusades with the Muslims. It existed at that time. And when you look at them progressing into the first Islamic war of the first Barbary War of 1801 with the Muslims that America had, it existed then. And it was under different names. Then they were known as the Barbary, or actually here, they were known as the Mohammedans. Then in the second Barbary War, they were known as the Barbary. Then World War I comes along. When World War I comes along, we see how it's the same layout, the same people, and as we progress forward, it's like I'm saying, these things are important to understand, and I'm just making points here, and I'm just discussing right now about things. What it is, you have to understand it. Remember these things because I'm planting the seeds right now for as we go forward so you can understand the tie. What I'm saying is the Barbary War I was the same people known then as the Mohammedans, which was the Islamic Muslims, attacking America, pretty much still waging at that time too, as they have been ever since they've been founded, a war for jihad, world domination. The second Barbary War was the same, but then they were known as the Barbaries, not the Mohammedans anymore. And then when we get to World War I, which we're looking at now, that's what I'm saying. When we get to World War I, there's an alliance, and that's why we're going to have to start the next one over on this, because we're going to have to talk about all the members. We get into the race riots of Woodrow Wilson. We don't talk much on the war, on the World War I and the ties between World War I, though I included all these volumes here for you to be able to go and read up on the story of the Great War of World War I. So I have those things in there, that because we're talking American history, and this involves world history. And in the world history is what I'm trying to say, is the enemies of America. Now, during World War I in the 1900s, we also had, which I didn't bring up. I'm going to real quick go back. We'll touch on this real quick, and then we'll call it in. We'll call it. But I just want to touch on this. There's something that's just coming to mind I didn't touch on, was Australia. During World War I, Australia fought with us. Actually, we understand, too. America never declared war on anyone during World War I. We fought in assistance to that of our allies in World War I. We never actually declared war on anyone, and no one actually declared war on us in World War I. We were just a part of it and fighting with our allies. in defending them. And Australia became, at that time, an ally to America. And in that time, Australia had embraced the ideology of Americanism. Australia had adapted the United States Constitution near verbatim. They just pretty much took the United States off the top of it and put Australia, and that became the Constitution of the Australian people. And Australia became our biggest world ally at that time. Now, this was the fear of the axis of all our enemies in the world, was that Americanism would start to spread. This was what the fear of the world was. This was the fear of the Muslims, of the kingdoms of Great Britain, of the kingdoms of England, Ireland, Scotland, all these monarchies and superior rulers, and even that of the totalitarian dictatorships of the elitist imperialism that was taking place in China with the communists. They all feared that Americanism would spread. And what I mean by spread is like what happened. Australia adapted the same constitution. Australia went from a monarchy to a constitutional republic, just like America. They had a verbatim. That was the first country to near verbatim the United States Constitution and become an ally with us. The sad thing about it is, I think, is that we should have gone one step further in the alliance and unified as a nation under one United States. We should have made Australia a part of the United States and tried to mend and unite a permanent unionization between that republicanism, but we didn't. And it didn't take long for the Democrats to break it down. And with Australia as well, now that when Australia adapted, I just want to look it up real quick and see. Just give me 1 minute. See if I can find it. In 1901, so right around the time, right after the time of the World War I, with Australia as an ally, Australia in 1901 adapted pretty much the United States Constitution as verbatim, as like just took off the United States and put them. It was our first world national ally that literally unified with us on the principles and values of Americanism. And that's my point I'm trying to make. Now, we do develop, as we go forward, other allies, only, believe it or not, sadly, very few. The sad part is that those who claim to be our allies, except for a few, have never really been our allies. Like Arabia is not our ally. Today we think they are, but they're not our ally. Canada is not our ally. Canada is a nation that's of a monarchy riddled with that of Tories, who are on the same elitist principles of that what they've always been and have been for literally thousands of years. It hasn't changed. They're just acting in the way they act to keep peace for the time until they slowly, like what's happening in America right now, is we're being as ignorant as what Greece was, as ignorant as what Australia was, as ignorant of what Persia was, as ignorant of what Iran was. We're being ignorant in the sense that we're allowing our enemies, and not us, well, yeah, it is us. I guess the American people have our own ignorance. We're allowing our enemies to come in and take up position within our nation and our government and hold positions of the greatest and highest positions of power in our nation. And we're totally oblivious to that they are our enemies and they're trying to destroy us from within. The Democrats have been on board with this the whole time. The Democrats are the longest standing ally to our enemies and the longest standing enemies within. They have been here since this nation was founded. They're still the very same enemies when we look at the destruction of what's taken place. And then two, another thing we want to touch on, Woodrow Wilson, of which I mentioned in other videos, if you watch my videos about Democrats, Republicans, what have you. Woodrow Wilson as well during the early 1900s, which we want to get to. So I'm going to try to just touch on these things. Actually, we'll just do a review on things we forgot in the next video when we go into going from 1920 forward. So with that, I'm just going to say that's, this video here, I know it's a little bit confounding. I feel it was confounding. I don't know if it was a good video or a bad video. I do these things spontaneously. I've been wanting to get out this information. I collected all these websites to be able to do this and get it out there, just so you guys would have yourself something to go do some read up, due diligence on, and get an understanding of history yourselves. I just try to give the breadcrumbs to the facts to where you understand the political ideology of it. And in truth, so you understand too, it's not as complicated as what people try to make it out to be, and historians try to make it out to be, with all these confounding different names and sects that come up in the rise of all. Look, it's the same people. They just keep changing names. Okay, and that's what they're doing. They're just trying to confound people by changing names. But the principles and values of totalitarianism, superialism, authoritarianism, all remains the same as what it is. And that of Americanism, well, that we're losing. That's the scary part. We're losing Americanism. And we're allowing them to infiltrate and diminish our Americanism with that of totalitarianism, elitism, and superialism. And they're actually getting away with it through being able to infiltrate our nation through the Democratic Party, who has opened their doors to our known and long-established declared enemies like the Islamic Muslims, who are now in our nation in abundance. And believe me, I can tell you right now, and then I'm going to end this. In the future, if we don't stop this now, I may live to see it. I'm not so old that I might not live to see it. But there's a chance. I hope I don't live to see it. I hope it does not happen in my time, but it's already happening. I see it happening right now. And somebody who knows history, I see the reality. The handwriting's on the wall. It's horrifying what I know is coming in this country soon, and it's going to happen. History is clear. The ideology and the principles and foundations of these foreign totalitarian regimes are very clear. They're trained in history of the long train of abuses and like our declaration says, insurpassions of what they have afflicted on society of humanity throughout the last 1,400 years with the Islamic Muslims and literally tens of thousands of years with the other world totalitarian regimes, which have been in power and existing for thousands of years, is self-evident. And it's clear outside of what we are not exposed to or see, because our own media is complicit with this treason. Social media is complicit with this treason and masking and hiding because they say it's offensive from the American people, the truth of what's going on around the world with the inhumanity right now, the affliction, enslavement, murder, torture, just genocide that's taking place. And like we hear small parts about, like right now, the attacks taking place on Israel, who's supposed to be our ally, but we have such a weak democratic administration in right now of disgraceful people that they would allow and let attacks like this take place on our longest standing allied Israel and do nothing about it, but verbally try to just play it down when they know for a fact. I got news for you. The Democrats are who allowed the Muslims into their administration in this country. The Democrats were aware those attacks were going to happen before any of us were aware, because they're the enemies within, allied with the enemies who are performing those attacks. And it won't be long, I can tell you, and that's what I say. I will probably live to see, and we will all, and I will see all of you who are ignorant to this, and all of you who are bliss to this, and all of you who don't seem to care right now. Believe me, I'm a business owner. I've been self-employed all my life. I love life. I love my kids. I love my grandkids. I pursued my happiness in this country for the hopes of being able to leave for my posterity something of something that would better the chance for them to be a better people than I was. But you know what? I don't think that's going to happen, because this nation's on its way down to a decline that's disgraceful. We had such a strong chance at being able to save this nation, but the only problem was we elected Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump did a lot of great things in his 4 years as president. He did example what a president's capability would be of what a proper president running the nation would be. The only problem was, in the very end, Donald Trump was a coward, and he let the Democrats force him out, and pretty much all that he did, now it's worthless because it's all been undone. And right now, the Democrats, by being able to do what they did and forcing him out for the coward he is, they are so emboldened in power right now, and so allied with that of our world enemies, that we are greatly at threat right now. Because I got news for you. And I think anybody who's got family, children in the military right now, National Guard, Marines, Army, what have you, understand that the plight of the identity attack on Americanism by these Democrats and their foreign allies, and stripping the American posterity of their identity, their pride in being Americans, their love of country, and even in their love of self, of who they are, with all the queer-natured things that these people want to do, is now infiltrated into our militaries at all levels and branches, and it's disgraceful what's going on, and we're in a very dangerous state. I'm just going to leave it at that. Very dangerous state right now. And the only hope for this nation right now is the true American who is willing to stand up and fight for this country. And soon we're going to find out just how many. And I sure hope there's enough left to be able to sustain our nation, because The world is getting ready to implode onto America and try to destroy this nation. It's what they've been trying to do for all the 244 years we've been here. And the American people themselves, the majority of Republicans themselves, I hate to say it, are disgraceful cowards, worthless, no good, disgraceful cowards. And there's nothing we can do about it. The situation is what it is, and it's going to come down to be what it's going to be. I would just advise everybody who's serious about this country, loves this country, and who's a true American, you better be in shape, and you better be ready, and you better be prepared, because it's coming. But with that said, I'm going to say thank you all for watching my video. If you watched it this far, if you understand it, I don't know. I feel like I may have lost my trend in this video because I was trying to do so much recoup and cover so many different bases of things I missed, and as well touch on what we were supposed to be going into the 1900s. I'm probably going to redo just a strict 1900s going into that era without all the recap, because it seemed to me, as I'm thinking back on it, very confusing. But again, I'm just going to end it now because we've been going a long time. So thanks everybody for watching my video, and I'm sorry if this one was a little bit confounding. I'll try and make it better next time, and I'll see you then.